The Jewish people have always had a peculiar relationship with money. Their Torah recounts tales of men accumulating fortunes of biblical proportion.
We've got a lot of what it takes to get along. We're rent money, the sky is sunny.
One last question. Any idea what the next iteration of the Israeli economy might look like? Are you seeing anything today that's moving on, that's a departure from what we tend to think about or think we know about the Israeli economy today? Well, one thing's for sure.
To make sure it happens.
Wie der Rebbe der Nosser gesagt, dass jede Nacht nicht geben auf Tzedok als du, was in Gashmis in der Tor bei Ismaise kein Pesach mehr riefen. Also können geben dem Schum, geöffnet dem der Rebbe der Ruf hat Ziner Choder. Also soll können mit keinem sein Achlatos Atebe b'Milua und tun das mit der Simcha v'Tuv Levo, wo der von der Verstandig am Egitem kam von dem Kocher, der soll können weggeben dem Schum mit Simcha und Tuv Levo.
Israel shows every sign of continuing to be a world leader in many aspects of high tech. But it's not just that. And the fact is Israel does have competition. And it's not just the United States and Canada. There's the European Union. And I mean, Israel is not alone in this. And there is a concern in Israel that inadequate government funding...
That year in business, I absolutely exploded. It was an incredible year from zero to hero overnight.
If the startup funding, for example, the investment funding that comes from venture capitalists all over the world, if this were to dry up, then the Israeli startup economy would dry up. So Israel in some ways is very vulnerable. What I think might begin to happen.
And he's like, I have a friend of mine, he lives across the country, he has no money, his parents have no money, no one has any money, he needs help. So I was like, sure, whatever he needs, I'll take care of it. And I supported him for the entire year. And it came to a point at the end of the year, I wanted to go back to Israel. I needed money to get there, I was short $5,000. I went to a friend of mine, I'm like, hey, this is the situation. Within 3 days I had 5,000 plus plenty extra to get me through the entire year. And it was just so clear to me that that was literally me giving to someone else. God gave right back to me.
When God took his people out of Egypt, he brought them to the foot of Mount Sinai and revealed to them many secrets, one of which was the secret to wealth. Throughout the ages, the world could not help but admire the Jewish people for their business prowess.
And in less than 20 years, they had become the highest paid executives in America. In fact, for almost a decade, Mayer was the highest salaried man in the world.
Look, you see how you do it, Nathan? An acquaintance had helpfully tried to show him. You add a little here, you subtract there, and then you add some more, and they don't know what it all comes to. You see, this is what I mean, and he pulled out a bill of sale for a television set. $285 base price, $14.95, 90-day warranty, $295.95, selling price, $12, tax, $311.95, total, $31.95 down payment, $280 balance, $88.42 carrying charges for 24 months, $368.42 grand total. That grand total is a really fine gimmick. My own thinking, he said. You subtract the down payment, so that doesn't figure in at all. Otherwise, it comes to over $400, and that would be no good. They won't buy. And then the 90-day warranty. That's pure gold. The carrying charges, well, if you want to know the truth, after you take the down payment away, they're between 25 and 30% a year. But you've got to do it, Nathan. It's the only way to come out. These people, there aren't half of them that are going to pay for 2 years. So you've got to figure 1 year, and you make a profit. I have this woman, and she comes to me, and she still owes me $100. And she tells me they have cut her check, and she cannot afford to pay $20 a month. So I tell her, okay, you're a good woman. I trust you. Just pay me the interest, $5 a month. So she has paid me now $5 a month for 2 years, and she still owes me the $100. I can't complain.
Admittedly, in some generations, the admiration turned to hatred.
One product of this relationship was the man who would become the dictator of Uganda, Idi Amin. He received military training in Israel.
Nathan was terrified because in the writings of Mrs. Pat Alexander, the Negro editor of the Los Angeles Herald-Dispatch, he was reading for the second time in his life what he had read in Germany in his youth. Quote, I have accomplished indeed a rare feat in America. I am the editor of an independent newspaper not subject to the control of the American Jewish conspiracy. Thus, while you have run almost every other Negro and Gentile-owned newspaper out of business or pressured them into printing only material which you and your gang approve, you are at a loss to know what to do about me, whom you cannot control. You have tried to murder me on 2 occasions. This is unfortunate because all you succeed in doing was to expose your viciousness, your hatred of all, and I mean all, black people. Negroes rendered your ability to work with me as an equal impossible. Relative to Zionists, all Jews are not Zionists, and all Zionists, communists, fascists are not Jews. People are beginning to realize that the Jews and not others are anti-Semitic. That Jews are Europeans, European white people who stole Palestine from the Semitic people, the Arabs, by deception, murder, and robbery. Teach them that the day of reckoning is coming, and that will be the day. If you were familiar with Negro history in this country, you would know that the Negro became passive when the Negro preacher joined you and your crowd and ganged up on the Negro masses. You are using business fronts in the Negro community today in conjunction with the Negro preachers. Their days are too, like yours, numbered. If we could get you and your entrenched gang out of your federal government, maybe we would all be better off. I am expecting changes in these United States in 1966. The end is near for you. Your days of murdering, bombing, and poisoning people are coming to an end. An aristocratic lady with prematurely white hair, Pat Alexander, is a living embodiment of hell, having no fury, like a woman scorned. As a student at Columbia University School of Journalism, she had marched alongside Jews.
Frontline has learned that under a top-secret program, codenamed KK Mountain, the CIA funded Israeli covert activities in Africa with a budget of up to $20 million a year.
Slate. Explainer. Do Jews really control the media? Only the fun parts, by Brian Palmer, October 5th, 2010. Rick Sanchez. CNN anchor Rick Sanchez was fired last week for calling The Daily Show host Jon Stewart a bigot and implying that Jews control the media. Quote, everyone who runs CNN is a lot like Jon Stewart, and a lot of people who run all the other networks are a lot like Stewart, he said, trying to explain that Jews are not an oppressed minority. Setting aside the piety of Sanchez's claim, is he right? Do Jews control the media? Maybe the movies, but not the news. If Sanchez was referring to the people in the television business, he is wrong. Not one of the major television news operations, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, ABC News, CBS News, or NBC News, is currently headed by a Jewish executive. That includes Ken Jotz, the man who fired Sanchez. Or at least none of these executives has talked about being Jewish in a public forum. The internet is littered with rumors about various media moguls being Jewish, but few of those claims are backed by evidence. There are more Jews at the head of the country's major newspapers, but it's still a stretch to say that these publications are controlled by them. Even in New York City, where around 12% of the population is Jewish, there isn't any indication of Jewish dominance. At the Wall Street Journal, the only hint of Jewish influence at the top is the persistent internet rumor that the mother of Rupert Murdoch, the CEO of Journal, parent News Corp, is Jewish. Murdoch has joked about the gossip, but hasn't addressed the whispers publicly. Jewish-American businessman Eugene Myers bought the Washington Post in 1933. Hollywood is a slightly different story. The conventional wisdom that Tinseltown is Jewish-dominated has some basis in reality, as Jews seem to be disproportionately represented in the upper echelons of film directors and executives. According to the 2008 American Religious Identification Study, 1.2% of the nation's adults are Jewish. Yet, of the top 20 directors, producers, and other non-acting movie bigwigs listed in The Guardian's Film Power 100, 9 are Jewish, 45%. There are plenty of prominent Jewish execs slightly further down the list too, including brothers Cohen and Weinstein. The top executives of major conglomerates are also Jewish in greater numbers than the general population. Robert Iger at Disney, Sumner Redstone, Leslie Moonves at CBS are all Jews, while Jeffrey Imnet at General Electric, Jeffrey Bilks at the Time Warner are not. Jeff Zucker, the departing head of NBC, is Jewish.
naval missile is reportedly one current co-production with South Africa. The issue of whether Israel has transferred U.S. technology as well as its own was raised in a 1987 State Department report on South Africa. It advised the president to, quote, adopt measures to prevent countries such as Israel that import U.S. arms and defense materials from transshipping such goods to South Africa, end quote. Never
These images conceal memories. Beneath Hollywood's familiar stories lies a hidden history of persecution and murder which haunted a small group of men. Not American cowboys, but Jewish immigrants. This is the story of the founders of Hollywood. The story of the idea that became their America and ours.
Over history, there's been other groups that have had prominent merchant classes that also went to other parts of the world and established beachheads. I'm thinking of particularly the Chinese throughout Southeast Asia, where they are often some of the chief merchant classes in some of the big cities in Southeast Asia, even today, although they are a tiny percentage of the population. Right. And India is another example where there's been a lot of merchant activity, much of which has, or some of which has gone overseas. So there's a diaspora from India of business people. How do those groups, how are they similar to what's happened in Israel and to Jews over the years, and how do they differ?
Well, there's two different ways of answering the question. One is that Jews, until really 1948, were almost like a periphery or a diaspora without a center. That is, spiritually, they had this notion of the land of Israel as their center, but that wasn't really their physical demographic home. So they were like a donut, as it were, but there's no center in the donut. And they dealt with each other.
The idea is to have a pool of people available when needed who can provide services but will keep quiet about them out of loyalty to the cause. They are paid only cost. Often the loyalty of a Sayan is abused by katzas who take advantage of the available help for their own personal use. There is no way for the Sayan to check this. One thing you know for sure is that even if a Jewish person knows it is the Mossad, he might not agree with to work with you, but he won't turn you in. You have at your disposal a non-risk recruitment system that actually gives you a pool of millions of Jewish people to tap from outside your own borders. The one problem with the system is that Mossad does not seem to care how devastating it could be to the status of the Jewish people.
It became an excuse to commit unspeakable atrocities. Their greatest critics will say that they control the banks, the media, and the financial markets.
Throughout the Jewish world. So you've got that Jewish merchant in New York who's got the colleague or the relative in Cleveland and someone in Los Angeles. So there's a lot of horizontal integration. And something similar happened, of course, with, let's say, Indian merchants throughout much of Africa, throughout British Africa. The difference is that there was a homeland. There was a homeland, and although some of these Indian merchants never saw that homeland, some of them did. You have Mohandas Gandhi, for example, who's, in his case, an attorney from Gujarat in India, but then he winds up making his career partially in South Africa and then comes back to India. There is a center. There's a place to go back to. For Israel, for the state of Israel, that only happens in 1948. Then you have a state. But until really the 1970s, you don't have lots and lots of Israelis living abroad as you do now. Now there's an Israeli diaspora of, who knows, 500,000, as many as 1 million, living in the United States. They have very close ties, including economic ties with the state of Israel.
Scientific Liaison Bureau. The Scientific Liaison Bureau, or LACAM, was not named in this classified 1979 CIA report on Israeli intelligence, captured at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. But the CIA did know that Israel's top priorities included, quote, collection of information on secret U.S. policy or decision, if any, concerning Israel, collection of scientific intelligence in the U.S., end quote. This mission, it seems, was the responsibility of the Secret Intelligence Branch.
So I'd say now, the Israeli diaspora relates to Israel economically the way that the Indian diaspora or the Chinese diaspora of the past may have dealt with their homelands.
So it's become more similar since
It's becoming more similar because Israel's a normal state in that sense, and the Israeli diaspora is a normal diaspora.
Israel as a...
There is a secret to wealth that the Jewish people have known for thousands of years. It was hidden inside of the Bible and was not ready to come out until this very last generation. You see, we're all ruled by one power, by one force, by one creator, and we all are subject to his laws. And when we know how to apply that to our lives, we're able to unleash wealth that we never thought possible. The Jewish secret to wealth is charity.
For over 2 decades, he subscribed to that old discredited Republican philosophy. Give more and more to those with the most and hope that prosperity trickles down to everyone else. In Washington, they call this the ownership society. But what it really means is that you're on your own.
In Hebrew called tzedakah.
The big key is the tzedakah. Giving the money actually gives us back more.
They're careful about, and I would finish with this, there's a difference between saying that there can be a cultural influence behind economic behavior and some sort of determinant. That people, because they belong to a certain ethnic community or identify with it, that they are automatically blessed or cursed or, predetermined to succeed or to fail economically.
Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris. And statistically... You weren't doing it right then. Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
I can't find the compulsory mutilation of the genitals of children a subject for humor in that way.
There's enormous parameters, enormous spectrum of possibilities. This is not an issue of race. This is not an issue of genetics. This is an issue of culture. Culture is fluid and organic, and all we're talking about is a field of possibilities, which in the case of Israel, they've managed to realize.
There's much of its defense technology with a country officially embargoed by the U.S., South Africa. Refueling tankers like this one, sold by Israel, allow South Africa to pursue its enemies far beyond its borders. Since 1977, when the UN embargoed arms sales to South Africa, Israel has sold everything from missiles and jet fighters to howitzers and guns. They shipped communications equipment, radar systems, and intelligence technology.
Der Rebischter sagt, als eine Medagdik, Pidjodoke, Bemele, eine Medagdik, Nime, et Muras von Arbo, Pomim, Gitnem, Chamisha, Pomim, Vekama, Pomim, Kocho, und zusammen damit Techet, mit dem Schäfer, Tevas, mit Gittem, Milmailo, Gitmen, Meche, de Broche, Watzloche, soll das vernutzen. Auf gesunde Sachen und friedliche Sachen, in Jone, Teru, mit Zwiseo, mit der Simcha, Vetuvli, Woch.
This business of not being with nature, and we speak with sort of derogation of the nature religions. You see, with that fall in the garden, nature was regarded as corrupt. There's a myth for you that corrupts the whole world for us. And every spontaneous act is sinful because nature is corrupt and has to be corrected, must not be yielded to. You get a totally different civilization, a totally different way of living, according to your myth as to whether nature is fallen or whether nature is itself a manifestation of divinity, and the spirit being the revelation of the divinity that's inherent in nature.
Genital mutilation is no joke.
Well, are some myths more or less true than others? They're true in different senses, do you see? Here's a whole mythology based on the insight that transcends duality. Ours is a mythology that's based on the insight of duality. And so our religion tends to be ethical in its accent. Sin and atonement, right and wrong.
It does seem that you are, to a degree, trying to outsmart God. If the lawmaker never makes a mistake, and still there's a loophole there. Why is that loophole there?